Hi, this is Wayne. I'm the brewmaster for Cigar City Brewing. We're broadcasting from our production facility in Tampa, Florida. And the first beer that we're going to try is Highlight IPA, our top-selling core brand. So this IPA was inspired by the very origins of my home brewing back in the early 90s, which some beers that are now defunct, not even still being produced anymore in the Northwest United States, were IPAs that it inspired me to really start drinking craft beer in the first place. Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, of course, being providing a great deal of inspiration, and so I've just sort of been chasing what I feel like is my perfect idea of IPA for many, many years, and right now this happens to be the most current interpretation of it that is physically tangible. So with the beer, what I was shooting for was I wanted to produce an IPA that wasn't as dry as West Coast, but wasn't as malty as East Coast. So we're trying to create a balance with this IPA. We want it to be approachable, but we don't want it to be absolutely timid. So we've really focused on balance. We use 6 to 7 different hop varietals in the production of this beer. It gives it citrus to tropical fruit-like notes. There are slight biscuit notes that you'll get from the use of toasted malts. We also use some two-row pale and a little bit of Munich and some crystal malts, which add color as well as some caramel sweetness. So the beer is about 7.5% alcohol by volume. It can have a slight haze due to dry hopping, and let's check it out. So lots of citrus, tangelo, and a little bit of white grapefruit peel. There's some mango and pineapple as well in the aroma. The beer starts out with a forward hop expression, so you get some citrus attack, mainly orange, with some underlying white grapefruit, and then it starts moving towards mango and pineapple, with caramel emerging in the center, and slight toasted notes towards the back end. All right, so that takes care of Highlight, our first beer that we're discussing today, in the tasting room. So we're going to move over to Brewhouse 1, and we are going to discuss Maduro Brown Ale. All right, so Wayne again here in Brewhouse 1. This was the first brewery that we opened back in 2009. I arrived in 2008 when this building was just a warehouse full of junk, basically. No slopes on the floors that were pitched to trench drains, no tanks. All we had was my 3-vessel, 15-gallon brew pot from my home brewing days, and that's where we made the pilots back in 2008. So just about every core brand that you've had, especially Maduro and IPA, original core brands were brewed on that pilot system and packaged and carbonated and drank here for the first time before we ever even had a brew house installed. The first tasting room is actually in the area that we're shooting from right now. It was just an open room with guardrails around the sides of it, and it got really hot during the summer. And we dealt with this for I want to say 5 or 6 months before we finally converted in the old office space, which is right behind the brew house and fermenters behind me, into our tasting room, which is where we were before we came to this location. So let's talk about the beer, the very first core brand ever brewed commercially at Cigar City Brewing. It's called Maduro Brown Ale. It is an English brown ale with oatmeal which gives it a nice silky texture and mouthfeel. Let's see how it is. All right, so this one is for the malt heads, specifically Joey. There's definitely caramel, but it's a little bit darker caramel because there's also some underlying chocolate notes in the aroma. There's also a more complex nuttiness that this beer has versus Jai Alai. It's a blend of two different roasted malt, or not roasted, but toasted malts. The flavor is very similar. Opens with forward slight breadiness that moves into caramel and chocolate notes, sometimes hinting on light hints of espresso or coffee. And then moving into the finish, you're left with this nuttiness from the combination of toasted malts. There's also a slight woodiness from one of the hop varietals that we use in this beer. The fresher the beer is, the more pronounced that usually is, but the overall focal point of the beer is the malt in this one. It's definitely malt-centric. So this is for the malt heads, as I've said earlier. All right, so before we leave Brewhouse 1, this is what we call Spinbach 5000. It's an infusion tank. It's sort of like a hybrid between Sierra Nevada's Torpedo and Trogue's Hop Gun made by Braucon. So basically what we do is we add wood or spices or whatever it is we're going to infuse the beer with into the tank, and then we have a flexible impeller pump which takes beer out of the fermenter and out of the pump into the infusion tank. As it's going into the infusion tank, it creates a double vortex, which there's two inlet ports, so the top one is spinning counterclockwise while the bottom one's spinning clockwise, which allows us to pick up more of the wood or raw material that's in the tank more rapidly. After that, the beer is pushed back out of the bottom of the tank and returned to the fermenting vessel. So for our wood aging beers, just to give you like one example, White Oak IPA, it used to take us 7 to 10 days wood contact to be able to get the appropriate wood flavors into the beer. With this particular vessel that we've created, it only takes about 3 days. And we've also reduced the amount of wood that we would generally use for the production of this product by 33%. So you can see how we just find it fascinating, and we're really happy with our design. All right, so welcome to the packaging hall, folks. Let's take a short walk through it. You're gonna have to excuse our mess. We're in the transition process. We are commissioning a brand new canning line that will increase our canning capacity from 60 cans per minute to 170 cans per minute. Things weren't always that way, but let's just sort of take a walk through this and take a look at everything that's here. And I mean, the building is pretty full, and it's got some really nice packaging equipment. So let's go walk through this way. Off to my right are pack techs. These put the plastic tops on the 6-packs of cans. In the beginning, we started with 1. Now we have 2. Our canning line runs so fast, we have to have 2. Over to my left is a depalletizer. You can see we've got Florida Cracker cans in there. So I guess that's the next thing that we're going to package. This basically just sweeps the cans off of each layer of the pallet so that they can be filled with beer. We'll come back to this in just a little while and talk about it more. Let's keep going this way. This is the new canning line, you guys. Let's walk around this way. Got some kegs filled here on the right. It's a labeling machine there. This is our first canning line over on the right. We bought this from New Belgium several years ago. Like I said, 60 cans per minute on this one. And so this is Larry, the packaging manager's little desk. It has some technical equipment that makes sure that our canning lines are running correctly. But let's step back in time for a second here, and let's talk about what happened in 2009. A lot of the product that we're packaging was going into draft. We just simply didn't have the automated lines that we needed to be able to package any sort of volume here. So we ended up buying a 4 or 5 head wine filler. It's just spring loaded basically. We had a pneumatic crowner, and we had an assembly line method. So what would happen is there was a pump attached to the reservoir for this wine filler, and it worked off a digital float system inside the reservoir. So when the reservoir was getting low and liquid wasn't touching the probe anymore, it told the pump to turn on and fill the reservoir. Everything was filled by gravity. So we had one guy to my left. He was sanitizing bottles with a manual sanitizer, which had to be refreshed every 20 to 30 minutes. And then he would hand the bottles to me. I would take the bottles, I would purge them with CO2, and then we had a CO2 wand back then that was attached to the gravity filler. Then I would put each bottle onto the spring-loaded filler and wait for it to fill. Usually you want to try to rotate and move through them the best that you can. So as they fill, you're pulling them off and you're handing them over to the guy who's running the pneumatic crowner, and he puts a crown on there, and then he hands it off to the person that's wiping the bottles off and ultimately putting them into the mother carton or case holder, and then stacking pallets or creating pallets with this. It's very labor intensive. I remember the very first thing we packaged was Big Sound. We were in there for 12, 14 hours doing this, and maybe by the end of it we had packaged 7 barrels worth of beer. I was completely covered in bruises. It was incredibly miserable. In addition to that, you can also think about the heat of the warehouse while we're doing all this. It was just really a miserable process having to use machines like this, but it's where we started, and it was the only thing we could afford at the time to be able to start to put product in package, which was the ultimate goal, and it is the goal of any production facility. Draft just doesn't get you out there well enough. Following that, we moved on to another filler that, in my opinion, had less than great engineering. It was an inline filler by another company called PPM. So the bottles are pushed inline over towards the fill head. 5 fill heads or 6 fill heads, I think we had 6, come down and they fill these bottles. Then after they fill the bottles, a sweep arm pushes the bottles out onto another conveyor, which takes the bottles down to a single crowner. And here's where the problem lies. So what we wanted to do is counter pressure filled bottles, which means you're filling the bottles with carbonated beer and you're crowning them on foam, which reduces the oxygen levels in the bottles. Well, this machine was so slow that by the time the bottles got from the fill heads to the single crowner, they'd already gushed, and they were low fills at that point. So maybe the first 2-3 bottles out of all the fills were working, but the others just wouldn't. So we ended up running this line similar to the way that we ran the first line. We filled the bottles with black beer, added back sugar and yeast, and bottle condition. But this way, at least, it was a little bit more automated. However, the crowner at the time was a real nightmare and had to be hand-fed each crown one by one. We made this a little bit better over time, but overall, it was a real nightmare to work on too. The next phase in our packaging, the next step up, which in my opinion still is inferior equipment, was to purchase a Meehan filler, which we actually did have the capacity to fill counter pressure carbonated product. So it was a great relief having it, but it definitely had its shortcomings. There are issues with high air levels in package, inconsistent fill levels. The machine itself was made out of plastic and vinyl and different things that weren't very chemical or temperature tolerant. And when you're cleaning any sort of packaging equipment like these machines, you really want to be able to clean it very, very hot. Preferably 185. 185 for 15 to 20 minutes usually does a really good job killing everything. And it's just very important. And this is a machine that could not be cleaned that way. However, it did make our lives a little bit easier because we didn't have to have packaged product sitting around, taking up warehouse space, waiting to become carbonated in the package, which could take anywhere from 10 to 21 days. We always hope for 10 to 14, but we were at the mercy of how well the yeast and the sugar were homogenized into our bottle conditioned beer, hoping for the best. So now let's come up to now and what we're doing now in packaging. I want to talk about this line over to my right here in a second, but I think it's time to stop being so long-winded and drink some beer. So let's go on to the next beer. We have Florida Cracker, which you guys also saw on the decal a little bit earlier. This is our interpretation of a Belgian-style whip beer. Belgian-style whip beer usually has unmalted wheat, and it usually has oats in it, which ours has both of, and it also has spices in it. It has coriander, which is the seed of the cilantro plant. It comes across, it has some spiciness to it, but it's mild. It's got some citrus fruit loopy sort of characteristics to it. And we also used the other traditional spices, bitter orange peel and sweet orange peel in the production of this. We use a traditional Belgian wheat yeast strain on this beer. It's called 3944. It's banked by Y Yeast in the Northwest. So overall this beer is very refreshing. So it's lighter in body because it's very well attenuated, and it also has that orange peel, which adds to the drinkability of it, and a little bit of coriander, which adds a nice spiciness to the overall beer. The yeast byproducts for this beer also are very nice and work really well with the spices. So let's give this thing, let's check this thing out. Now, there's a little trick with this beer. So if I say I just pour it right now, I'm going to stop pouring it and show you this. So as you can see, we have a little bit of haze here, but in my opinion, it should be more cloudy than this. So if you like it like that, decant, gently pour, fill your glass if you don't want the yeast, but traditionally it's served with lees, which is yeast. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour a little bit out so I can reduce the liquid volume in the can. And now I'm going to take the can like this and swirl it. And what this is doing is it's rousing the yeast off the bottom of the can. So now, let me see, hold this. I'm going to try to give you a shot where you can see the yeast actually falling into the beer now, because now you can see it's much more murky. Yeast, another great thing about yeast, it's a really good source of vitamin B complex, which is what alcohol consumption depletes from your body when you're drinking. So now you can see, other than the fact that my pour is kind of lame, I should have a better head than this. You're looking for this kind of cloudiness, or maybe just a little bit less. All right, so getting into the beer. Immediately you get the yeast byproducts, and it's It's got some phenols, which are spice-related notes, but the spice-related notes are from the yeast and also from the coriander. And you also get some esters, which are byproduct of the yeast, and also from the orange peel. So you're getting a little bit of both of those things. It creates a complexity, and it also creates something that just smells inviting and very refreshing. You can tell it's something that would be a very great beer for Florida. Think about the heat and drinking a beer like this. It's only 5.2 to 5.5 by volume, so it's still approachable and fairly sessionable. So let's take a sip and see what we find in there. It's busy, but it's not so busy that it's not refreshing and too complex for the palate. So the main thing that I get is yeast byproduct, which I talked about earlier, the phenols, which is spice, and the esters, which is more resembling fruit. But then you have the coriander and the orange peels mixing up with that, and they're creating, they're really complementary and working off one another. They give the beer more depth without making it too complex. The body is light, like I said earlier, so it's a lot more drinkable. The attenuation level of this beer actually reduces the carb level to the lowest carb level of any of our core brands. So if you're watching your carb count, this is one of our better beers to drink. The second one is probably Invasion is probably the next one with the lowest carb count of the beers that we put into cans. So that's another positive thing about this beer. Once again, talking about the state of Florida and all the citrus production, this ties in with that, and it's just citric and spice instead of specifically citric, and just a great summer beer or anytime beer. All right, so let's walk back this way for a second. I'm going to briefly talk about our equipment before we move on to the next area. So let's walk this way. Over to my right, this is the canning line that we bought from New Belgium. 60 cans per minute. This is the filler, the seamer. So we finally got rid of all those inferior bottling lines and ended up with this unit. It's deconstructed right now, so pardon us for that, but this is a rotary filler, and it's mostly stainless, so we can clean this very aggressively. It's an Italian filler, and it only does about 800 to 1200 bottles an hour. But that's okay for us, because if we were to remove draft from our total packaging mix, 90% of what we package goes into cans and 10% goes into bottles. So you can see why we don't need our bottling line to be as fast as our canning lines do, or canning lines are, sorry. All right, so let's go over this way once again. Okay, so let's see, can you give us an angle from there? All right, this is a pretty good angle for us so we can see what's going on here. Oh, let me put this can away, sorry. Okay, so behind me you can see the decal. That's where the cans get pushed off onto the conveyor. Conveyor brings them down to this secondary conveyor, which delivers them to this twist rinser. This just rinses the can out with sterile filtered water. The can goes on down the line, goes into the filler. This is a 20 head filler. The line we bought from New Belgium is a 9 head. And then it goes and feeds into the seamer, which puts the lid on the can. This has 4 seamer heads. The one on the New Belgium line that we walked by earlier only has 1 seam head. It comes on down the line, it goes through some wind tunnels and flip boxes. Reason we're flipping the can upside down is because we date the bottom of it with an ink jetter, and then we flip the can right side up again, and we we'll have a blower that dries the top of the can right before it goes through a gamma ray machine. Gamma ray machine, if it sees that it's a low fill, there's a boot following the gamma ray machine, and it'll bump the can off the line so that it doesn't go to package and you get a can that's partially full at a retail point. Then after that, let's walk this way real fast. After that, if you look over to this station, this is a station I actually purchased from New Belgium. It's a 12-pack builder, but it's not going to be finished until this line's complete. We're still working on commissioning it. These are the two pack techs which are ran tandem. Basically, I think I said it earlier, this machine runs so fast that one pack tech can't keep up with the fill rate of this machine. So that's when we have them run tandem now. And that pretty much covers this facility. I can get into packaging specifics on why we chose cans over bottles. Perhaps we should do that in another segment. Honestly, I'll just do it really simple. The reasons that I like it so much are for product protection. While I enjoy the fact that they're more sustainable and greener and all these other things, my primary concern is our beer and the stability of our beer in a package. So for me, what's more important is, does the package protect our product any better, in my opinion? And through my research, yes, it does. So the main things about the cans that I like, the seam on the top of the can, here, pull the can back out again and I'll show you. The seam on the top of the can is metal on metal, so it doesn't allow any air ingress. Now overall, your package airs are going to be your packaged airs, and you can't really do anything about that. But this prevents any more O2 ingress. For the bottle, the crown gasket on a bottle does let oxygen ingress into the package over the course of time. Worst case, you'll see a 250 part per billion increase in package per month. These are really old school crown gaskets, but generally your packaging, if you're in good shape of product, is about 20 parts per billion to 30 parts per billion. Once you see the product get up to about 400 parts per billion, the level of oxidation becomes apparent and discernible to the human palate. So those are things that we don't want to do. So worst case gasket would allow that sort of ingress to overcome the beer in less than 2 months in package. Best case for a crown gasket would be the oxy barriers. The oxy barriers and the scavenging crowns, or crown gaskets that is, only allow about 60 parts per billion of DO ingress a month. If you look at that and you compare it to a can, which has no DO ingress, that still to me says, even with the best case on the bottle crown gasket, can is still better because it lets nothing in. And another thing is the UV protection that the can offers versus the bottle. Amber bottles do allow UV ingress, while they don't allow a whole lot unless they're put into extreme environments like direct sunlight or heavy UV light. They still allow UV ingress, which creates skunking of the beer. It has a negative reaction with chemical agents or hop compounds in solution in the bottle and creates skunking of the beer. Never happens with a can. Can lets no light through. So those basically are the main reasons why I prefer cans as a package versus bottles. So we're going to be moving to Brewhouse 2. That's our newest brewhouse that we commissioned a couple of years ago. That's where the bulk of Cigar City Brewing's core brands are produced. And cheers, you guys. I'll see you there. All right, so welcome to Brewhouse 2. It's our final stop before we do Q&A with Invasion. We commissioned this brewhouse a couple of years ago, and as you can see, we've very rapidly maxed it out. This facility is the bulk of our production. It's what allows us to do somewhere around 50,000 barrels this year, and we feel like we have enough space with a slight build out to add maybe 4 more of these 120 barrel tanks like this one right here, which should push us up into the neighborhood of 60,000 barrels annually at this facility by next year. Of course, we haven't ordered the tanks yet, so we're not going to benefit all that much from them this year once we get them installed. So this is a much different brew house. It's a 4-vessel brew house instead of a 2-vessel like brew house 1 is. So brew house 1, we could make around just over 45 barrels of beer in a 24-hour span. This one, we turn 30-barrel batch, depending on the beer. The ones that are easier to produce, generally we can make about 5 to 6 batches in a 24-hour span on this brew house. It's just made for faster production. It's got dedicated vessels that allow you to run multiple processes, so it's less likely to bind your process and slow production down. And that was the whole point of this facility. We started out with, I think, 4 120 barrel fermenters, which actually, let's walk down there. Let's go down here. This is a 30 barrel. So we saw some of these at Brewhouse 1, and these are the 120s. You can also see the tank net systems. They're really cool. We just started using these last year. These things will set off an alarm and let you know if your glycol chiller's gone down, which is what we use to cool down our fermentation and our beer ultimately. They will call your cell phone or alert your computer, and they've already paid for themselves. There's 2 situations that happened last year where they alerted us. One time we were in Puerto Rico brewing hopped on the high seas, and then another time we were at Hop Lot Selection in Yakima Valley in Washington. So these things are really handy. A lot of people in the wine industry use them as well because they only get 1 grape harvest, and then that just shows you how critical that is and how well these things work. So let's walk down a little bit more. You can also see there's some difference in these tanks. If you want to just take a look at this bottom manway here, we bought 2 of these tanks that have bottom manways. I actually prefer the bottom manway because it allows us to vent the CO2 faster from the tank. And the reason why you want to vent CO2 after you've gotten the beer out is because CO2 is carbonic acid, and we use an alkaline cleaning sodium hydroxide to clean these tanks. And if you don't get the carbonic acid out, it neutralizes the caustic or sodium hydroxide, and it doesn't allow it to effectively clean the tank. So that's why I like these better, but our cellar guys don't like these as much as they like the side manway tanks. So we only bought 2 of these. If you look to my right, you can see that's what it normally looks like when you don't have a bottom manway. And actually, let's walk out this way. You can see these are the side manways, and that's what you have if you don't have a bottom manway. And then if you want to turn around and look at this tank, you can notice that it has no manway at all. There's only a bottom manway. So those are the 2 types of fermenters that we have in here. Here's Fred's brewing on Brewhouse 2. What are we brewing, Fred? We're brewing Invasion and High Life. Invasion, which we'll drink next, High Life, which we've already drank. All right, so here's the next brand, Hotter Than Helles Lager. Has no spices in it. It's a traditional German style light lager. Helles means light in color, not alcohol per se. And this was the first. This is the first lager that we actually made a core brand. The first lager that we produced here was Oktoberfest, but it was draft only. And then this brand came along, and we felt like it was a good alternative to something that it's a nice beer because it's flavorful and it's light, but it's not light to the point where it's insipid and bland. And that's the actual intent here. It's trying to produce a traditional German lager. So let's pour it in the glass. It's going to be hay to gold, probably leaning closer to hay in color. Yeah, so the reason that we call it hotter than Helles is because it's hotter than Helles in Florida. No peppers, just puns as a slogan. Try to educate people on that. Has no spices in it. All right. You can see beer is strata golden color. Nice headstand. So lagers are like the white wine of the beer world. By that I mean they're not as robust as ales tend to be. So they're fermented at colder temperatures, and the yeast byproducts are more subtle and a little bit less aggressive. So you generally don't see the ester formation with a lager yeast that you would expect from an ale yeast. It's generally very clean. Alcohol heat, especially on this particular beer, is reduced. It's 5.2 by volume, and so let's try it out. You get floral aromas with a slight spiciness from Hallertauer Middle Fruit hops, which are my favorite German varietal hops for traditional German lagers like this, especially the more delicate ones. And you also get some yeast byproduct. It's maltier beer, but it's not slappy in the face malt. Also some straw-like characteristics in the aroma. A touch of honey. There's no honey in the beer, by the way. It's just the way that the malt expresses, and potentially some yeast byproducts from the lager strain that we use. So up front, you get a little bit of the spiciness and the floral notes, slight bitterness from the German Hallertauer Middle Fruit hops. Then the center opens up to malt and hay and honey, and then as you're moving towards the end, the floral and spicy Hallertauer Middle Fruit flavor comes in and just sort of rounds it out. And there's a little bit of like a slight toasted to biscuity expression towards the finish that finishes rounding it out and sort of drying up the finish nicely. Overall, it's something that you could sip on or drink quite a bit of during the course of the day. It's very Florida friendly and great beer for the summer. Okay, so this is the cellar, and let's start with this machine right here. This is our centrifuge. We commissioned it last year. This is what we use to clarify our beer. So prior to using this device, in the very beginning, we were doing plate and frame filtration, which uses diatomaceous earth. Diatomaceous earth is a sea organism, and basically the skeleton of that is used as filter media to remove solids from beer and clear it up. And that was what was in the pads that we used on the plate and frame filter initially back in 2009. Over the course of time, we realized that we're probably getting a certain degree of oxidation through the plate and frame filtration process, and we weren't really thrilled about that. We wanted to try to find new ways to reduce dissolved oxygen because, like I said before, the more you can reduce your dissolved oxygen levels, the more stable your product is in package. So one of the ways that we did that initially was we started finding with a product called, it's colloidal silica. And basically it's just fancy sand that helps to clarify the beer. You homogenize it into the beer, and it helps to remove the yeast and hops and other particulate that's in the beer over the course of about a 48-hour span. It's vegan friendly and all that stuff too, so you don't have to worry about it like you would isinglass, which is fish guts, or gelatin, which is ground up bones. So we decided that we wanted to be able to do it a little bit faster, and we wanted more control, so we ended up buying a centrifuge. So behind me, this is a centrifuge. This thing will separate the beer, so there's no media at all. All it's doing is spinning the solids out, basically. So we generally run it between 30 barrels an hour to 110 barrels an hour, which to me is pretty effective and works within our production range at the current moment. And no filter media ever needed, which to me is awesome. That's a really good thing. Also, these are bright tanks that we use to hold the beer. We will carbonate beer in these bright tanks by using CO2 stones. Here's a stone right here going into the tank. All it is it's a 2 micron perf stainless steel stone that has a pass-through. So it creates these tiny CO2 bubbles. Actually, we also have some ceramic ones as well. It creates these tiny CO2 bubbles that come up through the beer, and as they come up through the beer, they carbonate the beer. And this usually takes anywhere from probably 8 to 24 hours, depending on what we're doing. All right, so I guess let's go take a look at the lab. Let's go this way. Okay, so welcome to the lab. This is probably the newest branch of our brewery, and it's definitely a branch that we needed more than most of the other branches to some extent, due to just making sure we understand what's happening with our product. And our head of QA/QC is Justin Stein. He's helped to develop the whole program. He has a background in microbiology, and so we have a bunch of different tools that we use in here to determine what shape our beer is in. Let's walk over here real fast. This is our cellometer, so it does a cell count, and it also can tell us viability. Back before, we would have to use a microscope with a hemocytometer, and you have to count each individual cell. Now, if you look, you can see where the computer, this thing actually counts it for us, and it does it off of, what is it? Breaks it up into three different plates, or what is it?
4.
4. Breaks it up into 4. I guess like you would for the corners of a hemocytometer, right?
Kind of just takes a chamber, counts it into 4 bright field and 4 fluorescent images.
Cool. So that gives us a really good idea of what we're pitching as far as the health of our yeast and the population of our yeast. It also gives us a good idea of what we're about to send to centrifuge. So we want to kind of keep our cell count down when we're moving towards a centrifuge, especially with dry hop beers, just so it creates less hindrance of flow. So this helps with that as well. And we have a UV spec. So this will tell us our IBUs that are actually in the finished beer. Based upon our calculated, we can sort of gauge that and get an idea of where we're at. And this also could do diacetyl assays, which would basically tell us analytically instead of sensory whether our diacetyl levels are below threshold enough to be able to be within our product spec. Diacetyl is something that tends to rear its ugly head in lagers more often than ales, so we really have to pay attention to it in Helles and any of our other lagers. But overall, in general, it's just nice to pay attention to it, period. It's something that you might have tasted in Samuel Smith beers or Bass Pale Ale. It's a butter to butterscotch flavor. It's okay to a certain degree in some of the traditional English ales. I personally can't stand it, so we try to keep it out of everything. But this is one piece of equipment that we can use besides sensory to determine that. You've also got stir plates over here. Is this a forced fermentation? So we got a forced fermentation, and basically what we do is we pull beer off of a fermenter that we've filled. We put it onto a stir plate. It's got a magnetic stir, and we just spin it with no temperature control. And usually within 3 to 5 days, we'll get the end of fermentation will come. We'll be able to take a gravity, and then we'll be able to determine how far down the original fermentation in the tank is actually going to be able to go. It just gives you an idea. Are there any problems? Did something happen in wort production where we have a bunch of unfermentables? What exactly is going on in this tank? It lets us know maybe a couple of days before the tank is actually finished fermenting. So it gives us an idea. Shakers. The shakers are for packaged dissolved oxygen levels, or TPO, total packaged oxygen. We shake the cans, and that gives us an idea of if it's lower or higher versus shaken versus non-shaken. Different hoods for creating media. So we use the media to plate our beers. If they grow on the plate, then we might have something in them, and we need to look at it. Just because something grows on the plate doesn't mean it's always a bad thing. Certain things could be growing on the plate that actually aren't beer spoilers. But if it is growing on the plate, and even if it's not a beer spoiler, we have to ask ourselves, well, where is it coming from? And should we be worried about it? And how can we stop it? And we need to isolate it. We need to find it. So over here behind me, this is our 120-day library. So you can see a bunch of different, these are from all the different packages that have taken place in the last 120 days. And this shelf over here, which probably will make you drool, is our shelf for glass. So these are our glass. It's our glass library, basically. And some of these, I guess we've released all these, though. I don't know if we released this one. You have to go to Nightly Spirits to get this one in Orlando, and when he decides to release it, that is. Lots of interesting stuff, though, on this shelf. Really good beers. I try to make sure that I get informed about these before they get thrown away, so I can at least have the option to take them home should we no longer need to have them in our library. But sometimes I get beaten to the punch. All right, let's see. This is an incubator. So it's we can just set it to different heat levels, and we put our plates in there, and basically it can help accelerate the plating process and help us determine if we're going to have a problem in a beer sooner rather than later. So a lot of our barrel-aged beers, every single barrel gets plated and goes into this incubator, and then we determine if it's growing something. If it's growing something, then we don't put it into the overall blend, and we either dump it or we figure out something to do with it to where we don't run the risk of contaminating the rest of the brewery, because sometimes the contaminated beers are really nice. We've got those bread infections that just happen to take place in barrels can be really beautiful, and it's had some great mistakes in the past. We just have to be careful about the way that we manage them in the future. Then it's real simple stuff. Here's a benchtop pH meter. Here's a benchtop dissolved oxygen meter. These things aren't cheap. They end up becoming very expensive, but once you see how sensitive beer is to dissolved oxygen, you realize how important it is to measure it. This is an Anton Par, really, really cool device. So it'll give us our pH, gravity, and it'll measure temperature. It also measures, the cool thing about it though, is it measures gravity even if there's alcohol present. So that's something that a refractometer just won't do. These things do it. Here's a piercing device that we use. So what we do with this is we can pierce the crown or the lid of a can and run it through the DO meter, and this can tell us our total packaged oxygen, give us an idea of how well we're doing on the canning line or the bottling line based upon how it's running. So it's an important tool as well. This thing, even though it's a large one, it's a graduated cylinder. I use these things fairly often when we're blending barrel-aged beers, especially different threads in a single blend. It just allows me to understand what the beer is going to be and if we should change the blend in some way to make it better. So, gram scales, centrifuge, smaller centrifuge for lab work instead of floored centrifuge for actual beer separation. And let's look at one more area, you guys, and then we'll drink some Invasion. Come on. All right, so here's the magic room for me, one of my favorite rooms. This is one of the hop coolers. There's one of my favorite things about beer in this room. Bunch of different varieties. Some of them coming from Australia and New Zealand. We've got some experimental varieties. This one has some black raspberry elements to it along with citrus. It's really cool. We've got some other ones. Let's see what else we got. We got a lot of 527. There's also 529 and lots of other really neat stuff. I think we have some Calypso in here, some 6300, which is a chocolate hop, actually chocolate orange coconut. We brewed a couple of beers this year so far with that one. One as far away as England in February. And the good old dry hop for Hialeah, Simcoe, one of my favorite hops to dry hop with. Okay, so these are grain silos behind me. Each one will hold over 100,000 pounds. We have two, and the reason we have two is because as you continue to use malt off of the silo, when they deliver the grain, initially they use these pneumatic trucks and they blow the grain in. So when the tank is empty, the grain has to fall all the way through to the bottom of the silo. And when it does, when it gets projected that far, it has a tendency to shatter on the bottom and the sides of the silo. As the silo becomes more full, it's less apt to shatter going into the silo. When it shatters, the husk of the grain has a tendency to migrate to the top because it's lighter. So by the very end of one of these silos, you've got mostly husk instead of the starch source in the center of the grain. And that's why we always have two silos of the same base malt. Because if we have an issue with gravity, we can always start pulling and blending from the other one that still has a lot of starch material versus the one that's now become mostly chaff. So here it is, enough to hold 200,000 pounds of grain, and still that's not going to be enough soon. So, all right, you guys, that concludes this part of the tour. We're about to go drink some Invasion. I'll answer your questions. I'll see you in a few.